Hey guys, Coach Logan here. And in this video, I wanted to talk about positional play using an example from one of my own games. Now, what's fun about this video is I'm actually combining my own games with ideas that I learned from probably my favorite chess book of all time, which is called Positional Play by Jacob Aagaard. I'm going to put the link for that in the description, so don't worry if you didn't write that down. You'll get the information there. But Jacob Aagaard is one of the world's absolute top chess trainers for like high-level players. He's currently training some of the highest-rated players in the whole world. And he came out a few years ago with a book series called Grandmaster Preparation, which is fantastic. For anybody who's rated 2,000 or higher and trying to improve their rating and get, FIDE titles, I would highly recommend that whole series. But the first of those books that I read, and probably my favorite in the series, was called Positional Play. In that book, Aagaard talks about three questions you want to ask yourself. Three questions you want to ask yourself in any position. What are the weaknesses? So that could be like a weak pawn, a weak square, a weak king. What is my worst place piece? And what is my opponent's idea? He breaks all of positional play into those three questions. What are the weaknesses? What is my worst place piece? And what is my opponent's idea? So with that in mind, take a look at this position. Put yourself in my shoes. I was playing white here. Approach the position with those three questions in mind and try to come up with an idea and with a move. So pause your videos and take as much time as you need. Okay, so I'm going to encourage you to keep the videos paused if you need more time, but the first of those questions that I found easy to answer was, what is my worst place piece? And to me, that was this knight on b3. It has nowhere good to go. It can't go to a5. It can't go to c5. It can't go to d4. It just looks totally kind of like a dud. I can't really find much of a plan for it, or much of a good square in the near future. Some kids have told me that this bishop on g2 doesn't look great because it's just bumping into your own pawn on e4. But I would argue this bishop actually does something useful, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But this knight on b3 just looks bad. Likewise, what is the weakness? That's the other thing I was able to answer in this position. And in my opinion, the weakest square was this d5 square. Okay? Black does not have a pawn that can challenge you there. He does not have a pawn that can go to c6, nor does he have a pawn that can go to e6. So I thought that I'm going to combine the ideas of this misplaced knight with this weak d5 square. And so, again, pause your videos and then try to come up with what move I would play on this position. So I'm going to say keep it paused if you need more time. But I played the move knight to c1, which looks kind of weird, moving your knight backwards like that. But I had a plan. And let's see what happened. My opponent didn't play such a good move here. He played rook to d8. He actually had a better move to do, but we're going to come back to that. So I now continued with my plan, which if you haven't realized what it is by now, you should pause and take more time. But I played the move knight to a2. My opponent, again, in kind of a tough position, he played queen to c5. Didn't really do much to stop me. I played knight to b4. And now we kind of see the point of my plan. I've done all of this fancy knight, sort of dancing here just to get up one square. I've basically done all this like knight twirling and pirouetting just to get up one square to b4. But the point is b4 is a much better square because it helps control d5. So after my opponent played knight to b6, I was able now to play knight c to d5. And all of a sudden, I'm taking over this very, very weak square. Oh, by the way, he played knight b6 to try to control that square better, but it's kind of too late at this point. I was able to get a knight in there with great effect. He takes me, and now interestingly, I actually took back with the pawn. And this highlights what I was getting at earlier, which is that this bishop was serving a useful purpose in that it's sort of, it's kind of like playing quarterback for this pawn as it just kind of goes down this diagonal. Because now we've actually shifted things, so it's no longer the d5 square that's weak. That square has been plugged up by this pawn, but instead now it's the c6 square. which is why I left this knight on b4 and used the other knight, because now this knight can pop into c6. So let's see what happened. He played, again, he's in kind of a tough position, so his moves don't look too great. Yeah, but seeing that the d file has now shut down, he has brought this rook now back to h8, I guess trying to put pressure on my pawn. I dropped my knight into c6 with check. He played king d7. Just to show you, though, he can't really take this too easily because now my pawn gets even further. Now it would be a pass pawn, and now this bishop on g2 that looked like a dud before looks like a great piece. It's really supporting this pass pawn, and black doesn't really have a good way to challenge this. He doesn't have a light squared bishop. He doesn't have any minor piece that can take it. So this is a pretty good pawn here, and he can't even shut down the d file because these rooks would just go crushing through. So instead, after knight c6 check, he just plays king to d7. And now I've definitely improved my position. I've improved my knight. I've taken over the weak squares, but I still have more work to do. So I played rook to c3, kicking his queen. I drove his queen back. Now I brought my rook over again, threatening stuff like pawn to c4, hitting the pinned pawn. So he plays queen to c7. I played rook to b4. He played rook to g8, and now I decided, I have good attacking chances on the queen side, and I want to keep pressing there. So I played pawn to c4. He doesn't really have too much of a choice. I'm about to take all of his pawns, so he took. I took. Now I'm threatening discoveries with this knight, like, for instance, knight takes e5 check, and then I take his queen, so he has to move his queen again. And now I really wanted to break through, but I wanted to make sure my bishop was not loose on g2, nor was this h-pawn hanging, so I played bishop f3. Just sort of being patient. There's no reason to rush when you're in a better position, unless you absolutely see a tactic. He played a5, I guess threatening to play bishop a6. But now that I have enough of this attack going, I decided, you know what? It's time to be forceful and break through. So pause your videos here if you want to try to guess what move I played, but I'm going to continue. I decided I have no problem sacrificing the exchange here, and I just played rook takes f4, taking his bishop. He takes back, and now I've opened the e-file, and my queen is ready to invade with check. Defended by my knight. He only has one move. And now, again, I actually find myself asking the question, what piece of mine is not really doing much now? Well, this knight is fantastic. My queen is obviously doing something. It's getting very close to the king, making uncomfortable threats. My bishop is supporting my pawn on d5 and my pawn on h5. So that leaves just this rook on d1 that was useful on the d file, but now it can serve a better purpose. So here I played sort of the quiet but strong move, rook to c1, threatening all sorts of discovered checks with the knight. And at this point, I thought my opponent is just lost. He's going to give up soon. But he actually found an interesting idea to keep things complicated. It's a funny story. I was actually playing this game next to a grandmaster, and the grandmaster thought, who was just looking at the game later, he told me he thought it was just over here, but my opponent actually came up with an interesting idea to keep it alive. First, he played rook to g1, which pins my rook and threatens to take with check, which will remove a very important attacker and drag my king out into the open. Note his queen is defending the rook. So obviously I can't let that happen. So I played bishop to d1. He played rook back to g2 now. So this was the sequence that was very interesting. Rook to g1, sort of provoking me to play bishop back to d1, which now gives him access to the g2 square where he can go backwards. And out of nowhere, he's threatening mate on on b2. Right? He's threatening to play queen takes b2 with checkmate. So what would you play here? This is where I did not find the best move. I actually had a tactic here to win the game, and I missed it. Maybe I've studied positional chess too much, and I need to work on my tactics more because I missed a winning idea here. But please pause your videos if you would like to solve this. Okay, so if you want more time, keep it paused. But this really highlights how, even if you're a great positional player at any point, and I'm not saying I am, but just if you are, you still, in any position, you need to be able to spot tactics because you can't just be one or the other. You can't just be a tactician. You can't just be a positional wizard. You need both. You need to combine tactics and positional vision. And here I very unfortunately missed a tactic, but I actually had this extremely strong discovered attack. I missed it. I was looking for a good discovered attack and I couldn't find it. But the best idea was actually to play this move, knight to e5 check. And it was the last square I would have thought of. I had other ones in mind, but the point is black is in check now. Unless they want to lose material, the only square they can go to is king b8. But now from there, the knight can actually pop into d7, and you're forking the king with check and the queen, which means you're just going to win their queen. That'll eliminate any threats that they have, and you're just going to be completely winning. I miss that. Sometimes it's tough to see knights going sort of backwards out of play. Instead, I decided to grab a pawn and then keep an eye on this b2 square. So I played knight takes a5 check. Note, again, this is a discover check. He played king b8, and then I played knight c4, which attacks his queen and defends my pawn. I still prefer my position here, but it's definitely unclear. I really missed the chance to put the game away, and he's still, alive in this. So he played queen to f2, which is putting pressure along the second rank. I took another pawn with check. He played king to a8. I decided to try to bring my queen closer to his king. And, getting scared, he played queen a7. And at this point, I actually do have another tactic to win. This one I did catch. Maybe this one isn't as hard, but I found it. So again, pause your videos if you'd like to try, but I'm going to continue. Knight to b6 check, and, he has two choices. He could either play king to b8 or take the knight. If he takes the knight, my queen just captures. So that's not such a great option. But unfortunately, king b8 is even worse because now I have checkmate in one move. 2 seconds to find it. Yeah, queen to d6. And I actually played checkmate over the board and won. So that was kind of fun. Yeah, so it was a really interesting game using these 3 questions from the Agard book and applying them in my own game. Now, the last thing I want to say before closing out the video is if we go back to the critical position, right? So if I just scroll back here to where I first played knight to c1, let's just go back. Right, so in this position, sorry, he played bishop f4, I played knight to c1. Had my opponent known about the 3 questions, he might have asked himself here the 3rd question. Notice when I said knight to c1, I actually only talked about 2 questions. I said, what was my worst piece? The knight on b3. And what was the weakness, which was the d5 square, right? The square over here. However, my opponent should have asked himself, what is my opponent's idea? Well, if he had noticed that my idea was to play knight into a2 and then to b4, he might have come up with the very clever move here, queen to b6, which the point of that is, if I now play knight to a2, getting ready to head into b4, he can stop me now. How can he stop me? Try to figure it out, but I'm going to continue. He can play pawn to a5, and all of a sudden this knight is still pretty bad over here, right? And black is threatening stuff like pawn to b4 at some point. Black might have some good counterattacking chances. It's not so clear, right? His rook is on the c file, his knight is very good on c4, his queen is on a good square. It's all of a sudden, it's not clear at all, right? Instead, in the game, if you remember, he played rook h to d8, which missed my idea. Now, when I played knight to a2, he's too late. He can't play a5 here because I just take on b5, right? And he played queen c5, but now it's too late. My knight gets into b4, and I get everything I want, right? I've got those arrows highlighted still. But if he instead had realized what my idea was and played queen b6, then I don't get what I want because now he could play a5, and this knight I can't take on b5 because he just takes me, right? So, yeah, again, that's about it for this video, but really, really try to ask yourselves those 3 questions in any position, okay? I'll put those in the description too, so you can remember them. But I thought this was a really good example, this game, of asking yourself those questions and then trying to, apply them to any position. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that. This is Coach Logan signing out.